The following program contains adult language, poor taste in jokes, racial slurs, political slurs, slants, and all sorts of things that if you are sensitive and have a delicate constitution, you should probably go watch Teletubbies. You were warned.
Hey kids, welcome back to Roto Talk.
All right, you kids. Here we go. Starting to look like a boat a little bit. I did some rough sanding. This is not sanded the way it should be. But this is just rough. So rough meaning I got rid of all the excess on the edge. I have not contoured the sides real pretty. I haven't done a polishing sand on there. Not yet. So let me close this door. A couple notes on sand. We cleaned up this edge here. This edge here. Yeah, looking pretty good. Yeah, this is still the same day that we glued it or put the deck on. It's been about 5 hours. I let it sit about 5 hours and I sanded everything up. But like I said, I haven't done the pretty sanding yet. So again, use an orbital, do it by hand. I use the plane on the sides where you have the real big overhang. I do not sand that. Use your plane. Remember that guy? And I use a special blanket that I put down for sanding because when I sand, get rid of the ugly stand. A lot of times I have the boat like this. So I like to use a nice clean, reasonable, I shouldn't say clean, but non-greasy blanket or something like this. Just some old tarp blanket, whatever it was at one time. So again, just rough sanded down, nothing fancy. The reason I rough sanded it is I wanted to check all the edges, make sure I have no huge gaps or there wasn't just like a little bit of glue covering up a gap or anything like that. So in the beginning, when we were setting the bottom, I told you I was going to show you a way to fix this gap. You're always going to have a gap of sorts. You're always going to need, I shouldn't say always, there are probably some meticulous guys out there that will, find a way to do everything perfectly. That's fine. Good for you. But, so here's what I use for gap filler. Now, there's a bunch of ways to do this. If it's just small gaps, or you're only building a boat a year, or you're building a boat every 2 years, maybe it's the only boat you'll ever build. That's fine. All you got to do to fill a gap, use epoxy. Use some sawdust. Maybe take the ass end out of your sander, get some sawdust, mix that sawdust with epoxy, smear it in there, sand it down. Or you could use normal epoxy. Believe it or not, you can take cornstarch, mix it in epoxy or fiberglass, whatever you're using, and it works almost the same as that fiberglass, what do they call it, micro balloon crap. And you want to thicken it up or else it's going to run all over the place. So easy enough. You can use a myriad of ways. I buy this stuff, and yes, it's a big container, but it's called Quick Grip Filler. I use this on everything. Whenever I have gaps to fill, I love this stuff. It cures like that. I can literally come out here in half an hour with the temperature that is in here and sand this down. I don't like sanding epoxy because it's kind of rubbery and it really gums up your discs or your sandpaper, and it's just, this stuff sands beautiful. You could compare this to Bondo. You could, but it's not. Bondo's very rubbery. This is almost like a structure. It's very, very hard. It dries like almost like a putty, but like a fiberglass putty. It's really good. Bondo, I don't like. I don't use Bondo on anything. This stuff, I don't know, it's like $60. It's 3M. You can look it up on Amazon. I want to say it's $60. I buy it off eBay. And then you got your activator. Easy stuff. So, I think I do, an open tube of activator. And what we're going to do, I'm just going to show you a quick how I do these things. Okay? Be right back. So, here we go. I'm not going to open my new one. It's the same shit. All right. So, I usually use a Dixie cup, but I just took an 8-ounce paper cup and knocked it down a little bit. I do not mix huge batches of this at a time. I only do Dixie cup sizes. This stuff, like I said, cures Oh, and it will get you ripped. It smells exactly like fiberglass, by the way. But this stuff cures super quick. I mean, it gets hot in like 4 minutes. So make small batches, work fast. If I were to fill this up, that would be a huge batch for me, okay? The other thing I have been known to do as well, sometimes you might want to do 2 coats. Like one's a filler coat and one's a top coat. I learned this with when I used to build motorcycles and stuff. I'll actually thin it with a little denatured alcohol for a top coat because it's real smooth. You don't have to, but sometimes it's a little bit easier to deal with. Where's my putty knife? So very simple. A little bit of this goes a long way with this stuff. So we're going to go right over this gap. And we're going to take some schmutz. Again, not much. Now, before I mix this, I'm going to do a little talking here. There's a shock, right? Make sure this gets sealed up well, this can. But I'm going to be mixing another batch, so I'm not going to worry about that. Putty. I call this putty. Another good putty, by the way. Let me see. Hang on a minute. I haven't had this out in a while. This one's really good too, believe it or not. This is the oldest damn wood putty on the face of the planet they make, I think. Durham's water putty. Rock hard. Don't we all wish? Okay. It's a powder. You mix it with water. It sands really well. It cures really fast. It looks like wood. It absorbs stain. It's really, really good for light blemishes. Now, something that's deep like this is like what? You know, that deep. You could use it, but you can get air bubbles in it. So it's really good stuff. You can get it at any hardware store usually. Durham's. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it at Ace Hardware. You get it at Menards, Lowe's, whatever. Really good stuff. If you want to go a little bit cheaper, a little bit more non-toxic. It's very brittle. You know, it has zero give. This has give. Not a ton, but it's kind of like in between. This isn't as givey as epoxy. It's harder than that. But Durham's is literally, like they say, rock hard. So one thing I do is I will putty all the seams, believe it or not. Even though my seams on the sides and the top are really good, I will putty them all. And I do the top deck seam. I do every seam. I will do this entire seam down the bottom, even though there's absolutely no gap back here. You see this? I will still put putty over it because there's still going to be a little bit of a dip. And if you're painting a boat a dark color especially, you will see that, maybe even through the primer. So this is going to help you with your paint job, basically. Right now, this boat will float. I mean, it has no holes in it. But you want to fix this. It looks like crap, right? So I'll do all the seams. This stuff sands really easy. Even if you put a ton of it on and you're sloppy, which I usually am, it still sands very nice. So I don't worry about it. So we're going to take about that much. It ain't much. The more you put in, the faster it goes. All right. I want it to go reasonably slow because I want to stretch this out. Now, like I said, you can put some denatured alcohol in this, not a ton, and it'll smooth it out a little bit more if you want to. Depends on what I'm doing. If it's a real fine, like on repairs where I have to do patching paint, a lot of times I will do that. But in the case of this, it'll probably be fine. So it's like putting mud on drywall. Now, what I'm going to do, this is relatively thick, as you can see. I am going to run the orbital over this. I will not be hand sanding this. So, I use my orbital for finish work always. I use like 600 grit sandpaper, and then I prime. So, you'll see this big old crack. This Aunt Nanny's crack. It'll suck up a lot of this. I call this my rhinoplasty. This is where I do the nose jobs of the boats. Okay? So, because I like to shape them so they look really good. And I know you're like, oh, dude, that's a fucking mess. Nah, it's all right. It is a mess. But when I get done sanding this thing, and it's not much work. This stuff sands really nice. It's not like using epoxy where it's like gumming the hell out of everything and you got to sand it 16 times. It'll be fine. So we're going to do this whole seam. You might not be able to see this. And if you do have to get into some nooks and crannies to do some hand sanding, this stuff's fairly forgiving. You're not going to pull a muscle doing it. Now, I know you can't see this. This is what I'm doing here. Just the back side. Just a nice coat. And this stuff, like I said, it does add strength. Bondo will not. It doesn't add a ton of strength. Don't take that to the bank. Like, oh, I put this 3M putty on my boat. Now I can jump it. No. Off the ski jump. No. Can't do that. But it does help. It is a literal, like, a 2-part epoxy. You'll know it when you open that can, kids. It smells just like fiberglass. All right. So, then you got to wipe off your finger. Use a glove. I usually don't, honestly, because I like to be able to feel what I'm filling, if you will. I want to feel what I'm feeling. So, next thing we can do, I'm going to do all the outside sides. Wait a minute, as well. Now we did the center. Make sure we set it down on the center. And we're going to do the same thing for this top deck. And this back here, this back here. And then I will do, as you can see, pretty good. So I do this after my rough sanding. Now you can see there is a crack here, or a crevice. See if you guys can. I'm sure you can see it. Not big, but it is there. That's fine. I mean, it's not a big deal. This thing's glued down. It's not going anywhere. This is just aesthetics, just for looks. So we do the rough sanding first, and then we will do this masking, and then we'll sand it again rough, but this will sand off. I will literally be able to sand all the putty off this boat in 10 minutes or less. Then I'm going to slap on some 600 grit sandpaper and Bob's your uncle. There we go. Now I know I'm going to get some flack for, like, you can see these little bumps in here. I did not take my time with this paint job. I don't care. Again, the inside of the boat. I did this on purpose. I don't care. By the time you run your exhaust pipe right here, your engine right here, your shaft right here, gas bag, radio box, and then you got water lines everywhere, and then after your first run it's full of grease and bullshit, you ain't even going to notice that stuff. Trust me. And we also have this hatch, which I'm going to putty the seam on that as well. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to let it cure, sand everything up, and then we should be ready for hardware. Now, it's cold outside. I can't paint right now. If we get another good day, I'm going to slap paint on this thing. So we're going to skip the painting process so we can get this build video done, because I'm not going to video how I paint. There's far better painters on the internet than me that you can look, and I'll be glad to answer questions. I have a paint tent that I paint in, that I put up outside. I mean, as long as the weather's 60, high 50s or 60s, I can pull it off. Anything below 50, you can't do it. And I can't paint indoors. It's just too much of a mess. So after I get this puttied up, sanded, we do have to put our tongue. There's a tongue that goes right here. I'll show you that. That's basically a big popsicle stick. It's this. What I will do is I will take epoxy. Okay. And it's going to go right there. I'm going to take epoxy and I'm going to coat the entire thing in epoxy. That way it's sealed, because I did not seal this yet. And I'm just going to glue it right under there. You'll see it's just going to make like a permanent hinge, or like a flap hinge. And then when we put our hatch on, it locks it in. I'll show you that after it's done. It's not a big deal. So let me get on this puttying. Be right back. Hey kids, welcome back. Good Lord. Look at this. Ain't that great? It's like 28 degrees out. It's colder than my ex-wife out there, man. It is. I had to open the doors to finish the sanding. And it was like, yeah, pretty cold. So the shop's still heating up. So what we did, we finished sanding the rough sanding. So any sanding I do after this is going to be hand sand. So this was all done with the orbital. So I filled all the seams, whether they needed it or not, with our putty. Hang on. with our putty. Turned out really nice. So you can see there's our rhinoplasty. Just a little nick there and a nick there. Now if you paint this, I don't know if you guys can see that on the camera. If you paint this with a dark color, those are going to show. I'm painting mine white probably, or I haven't decided. I think it's going to be another Nintendo boat, and I think we're going to go white. I don't know. And then there's our hatch that fell on the floor. Yeah, I still need to, I don't love that. But anyway, so yeah, it turned out really good. So what I do is we first went through with the plane, got all the big stuff off with the plane. Then I took, this is for the exterior, I took 80-60 grit orbital sandpaper, and I use an orbital sander. A lot of people don't. A lot of people like to do everything by hand. Fair play. You know, whatever blows your skirt up. And so 80 grit all the way around. That's to get all the putty off, or the body filler. It's not putty, it's body filler. So I used 80-60 grit, depending on my mood, to get all the rough sanding in, all the edges, nice sharp. These edges down here, along the edge, dust, along the edge, you want nice and square and tight. I mean, you can cut yourself with this. The top edge, I actually roll. I haven't done it yet. I knocked off the edge a little bit. I don't know. You probably can't see it in the video. I knocked it off just a touch with the orbital. I took orbital and just, but I will 220 that down by hand. I like the top edges rolled, so it's nice and smooth. You don't have to do that. You can make them as tight and square as the bottom if that's what you want. Let's see what else. So after I knock off all the body filler with 80 or 60 grit and get my basic shape in, get my rhinoplasty, my nose done, then I take 150 on the orbital and I do it again. So I basically sand the body putty down to the point where it's ghost. I mean, you can see it in the seam really thick, but there might be a little bit of ghosting of, you can see the smear of putty on the sides of the seam. You know, I don't go all the way down with the 80. And then I'll take 150 usually. You could do 220, take you a little bit longer. But I'm going to sand it again. So 150 was fine. I took 150 and now it's nice and smooth on top. Even if you can see shadows, like there's an epoxy shadow. I don't know if you guys can see that on the camera or not, but it's totally smooth. But once I go over this with 220, that shadow will go away. Yeah, turned out really, really well. Like I said, I roll the back edges of the whole top. And all you got to do is take a piece of orbital sandpaper, or if you're using square for block, put it in your hand and just go like this. That's all you got to do. And it'll roll those sides real nice. Don't try to do that with a machine. You can't do it. I mean, you can, but once you get it painted, if you're doing this with an orbital, because that's what you're going to have to do to get a rolled edge on there, because if you just go flat across with an orbital, it's going to be you're going to get like this trapezoid look. Okay, so you'd have to do this, and it'll actually look like a twist, and that would be cool if you could do it symmetrically, but you're not. So just take a piece of 220, cup it in your hand, and just do this number here. Okay, I don't know if you can see my swooped nose. It kind of goes like that. I do that on purpose. It's just my thing. I do. I don't know. And that's really about it for the sanding. So plane everything down first. Do a quick rough sand. I do rough sand it down after planing. I don't know if I mentioned that before, but I use 60 grit or whatever. The reason I do that, because you're not going to plane it flush. You're just not. You're going to plane it down to about like that. Then you're going to sand it. The reason I sand it after planing is because I do want to see if there's any gaps or chips, or sometimes when you're planing, if you hit an angle with your plane, you can dig into the side. You're going to have to fill that. So I do a quick rough sanding with the sander, and then I just body fill every single seam. Because epoxy, if you stir it vigorously, you're going to have air bubbles in it. A little bit. And it is possible when you glue your seams that if you have like a little bit of a raise in a seam, like it wasn't clamped totally perfect, it's not going to hurt the structure, but you might have an air bubble in there, and when it pops, you're going to have a little tiny divot in that seam, and when you go to paint it, it's going to pop out. Pop out meaning you're going to see it. So I do a rough sand after the, see I can still feel there's a bump right there. Rough sand after planing, then I putty every single seam. it takes 2 seconds to do it. It's easier than hunting and pecking with a magnifying glass trying to find a hole. And then after that cures, I knock the whole thing down with 80 grit. And then after that, I knock it down with 150. It's pretty short work with an orbital. Now, a boat like this, you can use an orbital. A hydroplane or something with a lot of contours, like, okay, again, monos, something like this, you can knock most of that down with an orbital. Man, I need the dust in here. I blew this out with my blower. Look at that, all that dust. Something like this, I mean, you can do parts of it, but very difficult to do because you have all these steps, right? Even with a skiff, even though these aren't wood, but if you were to build one out of wood, if you could find the kit, and if you can find a kit, please let me know, because I can't find one. And this is impossible to do with an orbital. Now, you can do the main bits, you know, but all these, you can't fit an orbital in there. You're hand sanding that thing. So, I built this boat very sloppy, in my opinion, compared to a hydroplane. Like when I do a hydroplane or a rigger, riggers are even easier in my opinion, but hydroplanes or monos or whatever you're doing, I tend to be a little bit more careful with the gluing. Like I'm a lot more meticulous. I don't have, slop coming out because they're a bitch to sand. This isn't. This is so easy. It's all flat surfaces and no compound curves really, just straight in. So I really don't care. It's like I'm going to power sand this sucker anyway. It takes me 2 seconds. Those hydroplanes, those things suck. Those are Blazer Marine Rev 3s. And I love the boat, don't get me wrong. But they're a bitch to sand because they're just so many. It's a beautiful boat, but they're just so detailed. Very difficult to sand. Or if you're doing any type of boat, like say you're doing a PT 109 or you're doing one of those Dumas kits, God help your soul. You're probably not using an orbital on balsa or whatever, birch, whatever the hell they use on those things. So yeah, be a little bit more careful. And you can even tell with this, I don't know if you can see it in the camera, but you can see my edge is not smooth at all. I mean, as far as the contour, it's kind of like up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. That's because I used an orbital. But once I hand sand it, that minor wave is just going to go right away. This thing is going to be pristine. And that hand sanding doesn't take long at all. I can do that in 10-15 minutes. And it's not a ton of work. You just take your time, get your contours on there. And again, that's going to be achieved by just doing it like this. Very simple to do. Everybody has their own method. I've built a lot of boats. I'm going to say in the past 5 years, well over 200 probably. All from tiny little electrics to very large gassers to customs to whatever. And I'm no pro by any stretch of imagination, but you end up with a way that you do your own thing, and sanding becomes an art form to a point. And so you'll find your niche, and that's just how I do it. Again, when in doubt, follow the directions. This is not, I'm not saying my way is the right way to do any of this. Read the directions and just hopefully from this video you guys pick up, or the series I should say, you pick up a couple tips or tricks or whatever. Or you can always email me, text me, or send me a message on YouTube, or Joe, or the other. There's not a whole lot of people on YouTube, I don't think, that do a lot of boat stuff. They do some here or there. So it's kind of hard to, the forums are kind of a help. I'm not a big forum guy. I like to read the stuff, and once you get past the egos and the battles and the politics of things, which cracks me up that people have egos about this stuff, but whatever. You might be able to find some good information. Most of my stuff has been trial and error, like as setups, or Joe helps me out, or my buddy JJ Horvath is very good. He has a YouTube channel too, and all sorts of stuff. I'm not a big forum guy. I just can't. That's a rant for another day. But anyway, so, and then like I said, we'll also, this edge is kind of boogery a little bit. We'll clean this edge up. And that's from the clear coat. When I clear coated the bottom of this, you can just feel, you can't see it, but you can feel it. Okay? And there you go. There you go. So that's my version of sanding it. And once we get, once I hand sand it, which will probably be this weekend, I still need to put this tongue in here. But once I hand sand it, I'll send you guys some pictures of it. It's pretty cool. But next we're going to start moving into annealing, shaft tubes, hardware. The building the physical building is pretty much done. And we're obviously not painting it for a while because of the weather, but hopefully we get an Indian summer here at some point, and I can kick this up pretty quick. It doesn't take me long to paint one of these. So until later on today, probably, keep dry side up, kids. Bye.